Okay.
Hey, Gary.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Lynchburg.
Yep.
Here we gather in a spirit of freedom and friendship. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, whatever your age, whomever you love, you are welcome here. As we work together for justice, compassion, and peace, we also acknowledge with humility that our buildings sit on land originally part of the Monacan Nation.
Monacan Nation, yes.
My name is Gary Duvall. I've been a member of First Unitarian for over 50 years, and I'm a member of the Sunday Services Committee. If you're with us for the first time, we are glad you chose to be here this morning to participate in the service for this church community we love so much. We'd be happy to tell you more about our community during virtual social time or in Drysdale Hall after the service. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter and Friday email updates, you can fill out one of the yellow cards in the seat pockets in the backs of some of the chairs. If you're participating virtually via Zoom, please fill out the virtual visitor card found on our website at uulynchburg.org under Sunday services held via Zoom. You may also wish to join our Facebook group. For those of you on Zoom, please note that the order of service is in the chat to the right of your screen. As we enter our time of worship, we light the flame of our chalice, sharing these words. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our power, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you O Spirit of life.
I call that mind free which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith.
Which opens itself to light whencesoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven.
I call that mind free which is not framed by outward circumstances and is not the creature of accidental impulse.
Which discovers everywhere the radiant signatures of the infinite Spirit, and in them finds help to its own spiritual enlargement.
I call that mind free which protects itself against the usurpations of society and which does not cower to human opinion.
Which refuses to be the slave or tool of the many or of the few, and guards its empire over itself as nobler than the empire of the world.
And I call that mind free which resists the bondage of habit, which does not mechanically copy the past, nor live in its old virtues.
But which listens for new and higher monitions of conscience, and rejoices to pour itself forth in fresh and higher exertions.
Finally, I call that mind free which has cast off all fear but that of wrongdoing, in which no menace or peril can enthrall.
Which is calm in the midst of tumults and possesses itself, though all else be lost. Our opening hymn is number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life.
Children's story? Yeah. All right. Invite the children to come forward for a story, if you would. Good morning. My name is Annie, and I'm visiting here today, and I'm really glad to be able to tell you a story. Can you hear me? Is this adjusted well? Okay, this story is called A Favor Unforgotten. When somebody does you a favor, what do you do? What do you do? Sometimes you do a favor in return, right? Sometimes you just say thank you because you don't know what the other person needs. And sometimes you just remember the favor and maybe later you get a chance to do it.
I sing in the song.
And you sing a song. That's great. I like
I sing
singing.
a song with the maid.
Okay. Shall we do the story first? Okay. The story is about a little boy named Andy who was walking down the street one day when he saw in the distance a big dog. He didn't like dogs. They made his heart beat really fast and they made his legs want to run. And then the dog usually ran too, right after Andy. This dog looked different. He seemed to be in trouble. So Andy went closer. He was a big dog, but he wasn't running after Andy. He was a dog named Tuffy. That's what it said on his collar. But the dog was crying. "Are you going to chase me, Tuffy?" he asked. "Thank you." "Not today," said Tuffy. "I was digging under this fence and my paw got stuck. I know I've chased you in the past. I only did it in fun and I'm really sorry I scared you. Can you forgive me and help me out of this predicament?" So Andy, who suddenly felt really sorry for the dog and not at all afraid, leaned down, found the little piece of bent fencing that had caught the dog's paw, and bent it back. "Phew," said the dog. "I thought I'd never get out. What can I do for you in return?" Well, Andy felt so good not being afraid anymore that he said, "You don't have to do anything. I'm just happy to help. Let's just be friends from now on." So they walked a ways together and then each went their separate way. Tuffy the dog was walking down his street, happy to be free, when he heard a cat. It was a cat named Sweet Puss, a crabby cat who always screamed and hissed at Tuffy whenever they met. He was afraid of her. But this time she was up in a tree and she was crying. "Are you going to scream at me?" asked Tuffy. "Not today," said the cat. "The reason I scream and hiss is that I don't have any claws and I can't defend myself. I just act mean so that you won't hurt me. But someone put me up in this tree and I can't get down. I'm sorry I hissed at you. Can you forgive me and help me out of my predicament?" So Tuffy, who wasn't so annoyed at the cat now that he knew why she acted that way, stretched himself up the trunk of the tree and let Sweet Puss walk down his back. And they walked a ways together, deciding they could be friends after all. And then they went their separate ways. Well, Sweet Puss the cat was walking down her street, happy to be out of that tree, when she heard a loud, buzzing noise. "Oh," she said, "it's those terrible bees who always swarm around my head when I walk through their flowers. They scare me so. I don't like them at all." But she didn't see a lot of bees as she usually did. Where was that buzzing noise coming from? Being curious, she walked closer to the sound, and she saw a single bee caught in a spider's web. "Are you going to buzz my head?" asked Sweet Puss. "Not today," said Buzzy, for that was his name. "I'm caught in the spider web and I can't get home to deliver my load of sweet nectar to the hive. I only buzz you because it's my job to protect the queen, and I don't want you to get too close to her. And I'm really sorry I've scared you in the past. Can you forgive me and help me out of this predicament?" So Sweet Puss carefully lifted up her paw and broke just one string of the spider's web, just enough to let Buzzy out. Well, Buzzy thanked Sweet Puss and then went flying back to the hive to deliver his load of nectar. And that's when he heard a little boy crying. There was Andy, the boy, lying on the ground, and there were two older boys poking him with their toes and laughing at his tears. Buzzy usually stayed away from all boys because they had big hands and they liked to swat bees. But he felt so good because of the cat helping him be free that he decided to help the boy on the ground. Buzzing his loudest buzz, he circled the heads of the two bullies who were teasing Andy. "Bees, bees," they screamed, for he sounded like a whole army of bees. "Run, run!" And they did. Andy got up, brushed himself off, and dried his tears. He looked around for the bee, but it had flown away. He smiled to himself, and he said, "You know, today I helped a dog, and then a bee helped me. Isn't it a funny world?" He didn't know all the things that went into those favors, did he?
No.
But it is just a funny world sometimes, and we happen to live in it, and aren't we lucky?
How funny doesn't have.
What?
It's actually the dog who helped him. Kind of.
Yeah, and he didn't know about the cat and the bee. And,
Still afraid.
right. So sometimes things happen and you wonder why, but it's a good thing when it comes out okay like that. Well, I think it's time for you to go back to your classes. And I don't know if there's a protocol, do you have something to say? Oh, you have to light a chalice, don't you? Yes. All right.
Sure, if he wants to, that'll be fine. So today, due to staffing shortages, we're all going to be in one classroom together, which is going to be very exciting. So we are going to be learning about resistance for the last week, and today, and we're going to be learning about how we stick together and stick to things to resist. And I will ask Beth to be our chalice lighter today.
The many ministries of our church are supported by the love, talents, and efforts of our many volunteers and staff, as well as the monetary support of our members and friends. If you found this church to be of value in your life, then please give generously as our morning offering is taken up, and Betty and Brandon. All right, thank you. We receive these monetary gifts along with the gifts of your time, work, and creativity, which also sustain our church. As together we give generously to support our congregation, let us also commit ourselves to a unity of spirit to make manifest a more just, peaceful, and loving world. It's also our tradition to honor the whole of our lives, And so you're invited to share the joys, sorrows, and milestones of your life journey. If you wish to share a joy or concern, I invite you to raise your hand or speak up so I can call on you. I'll bring a mic around. And if you're on Zoom, just speak up. Our meditation this morning was written by George Kimmick Beach. Some days, dark tremors sweep across our lives. Troubling events accost us. We've grown accustomed to such things, and often we have fenced off our natural sympathies with the thought, this belongs to somebody else. But now a crisis of life brushes close to us, touches us, befalls us, and those we love. We want now to know how and what and why. We want an explanation, though we know that all our explanations put together do not finally explain. They but fend off worry, anger, and grief. The mysteries of evil and innocence remain. The darkness of being at a loss remains. And in this abyss of the heart, we can but pray for light. This is when I pray, and this is my prayer. Let me be patient of all these feelings that drive me hither and yon. May I be at peace, more patient with myself. Let me live within the questions that promise no answers, but only signal the mystery that gave them birth. Let me turn from every pettiness of the heart, willing to see and accept that the world does not revolve around me. Let the grief, the pain, and the nameless trouble that overcomes me also open me to feel what others have felt. Giver of being and freedom, unbind my compassion for all beings about me, and again set free the child of grace within me. Our guest speaker this morning is the Reverend Annie Foerster. She's served churches in Washington, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Virginia was her second home of choice, and she always meant to return once she retired. But she kept failing retirement until last summer, when she said enough is enough. And yet she's speaking here. She came home again to Virginia, where she's now a resident of Waynesboro. She's the author of For Praying Out Loud, Prayers for Public Occasions, published by Skinner House. And as an introduction to her sermon, this reading is by Alice Walker and is from Her Blue Body, Everything We Know. Be nobody's darling. Be an outcast. Take the contradictions of your life and wrap them around you like a shawl. To parry stones, to keep you warm. Watch the people succumb to madness with ample cheer. Let them look askance at you, and you askance reply. Be an outcast. Be pleased to walk alone, uncool, or line the crowded riverbeds with other impetuous fools. Be nobody's darling. Be an outcast, qualified to live among your dead.
Thank you, Gary. My parents didn't attend church when I was a child. I was sent to Sunday school, to the Presbyterian church, because my paternal grandparents were deeply involved there. My parents, unbeknownst to me, assumed that I would choose to stay there or leave at some undetermined time called when she gets older. One of the results of this unshared church experience was a lack of discussion about religious concepts. My mother, fairly or unfairly, did not want to taint my emerging beliefs with her own atheism. But even with that, I realize now that our household was not devoid of theological counsel. It is clear from my earliest memories that all ethical decisions, all moral choices, all options of action or discussion were made under a prime directive, an overriding law, a distinct and definable theological principle. Because I was raised in the church of what will the neighbors think. I think some of you must have been too. You may doubt that God is watching your every move and recording your life in a book. You may have given up the idea that Santa Claus knows whether you've been naughty or nice. You may not believe that the devil is trying to tempt you, or that the angel of your conscience sits on your shoulder to whisper in your ear what is right and true. But never doubt that the neighbors know everything you do and have a strong opinion about it. That was the teaching I received. What will the neighbors think transcends any fear of eternal punishment, especially for a child. What will the neighbors think is immediate and binding, and there is no forgiveness. We may not find mention of this theology in any scripture, but it is implicit in all religions and literature. What will the neighbors think is peer pressure raised to a heavenly scale. It's why Hester Prynne had to wear a scarlet A upon her bosom. What will the neighbors think promotes Buddhism's moderation in all things and adherence to the Eightfold Path? What will the neighbors think is the precursor of Judgment Day? What's more, it is a theology that skulks within us even when we've gotten older and wiser, or left the family or the church of our origin, or become a Unitarian Universalist. People who are raised in the theology of what will the neighbors think, or WWTNT, are polite, loving people concerned about others' feelings and needing to be liked. How could we be otherwise with the eyes of the local world constantly upon us? Just experiencing some of your kindness here this morning, I suspect many of you attended the church of what will the neighbors think as children. In many Orthodox churches, the theology of WWTNT is incorporated into the doctrine. It is refined, it is redefined so that ultimately you don't have to worry about what all the neighbors think. You have only to worry about those who count. That is, those who attend the right churches and believe the right things. In the liberal church, we are at a disadvantage because we choose to believe that everybody counts, that everybody's opinion is important, at least to the degree that it should be given a hearing. So consequently, we have a difficult time being theologically rude and socially disruptive. We have a negative attitude about evil, sin, punishment, and in-your-face disagreement. And I brought examples to prove my point. Story number one of my own stories. My 9-year-old daughter was once picked up with a friend for shoplifting, for taking some trinket off the counter as they dared one another to juvenile bravery and disdain for the social order. She was about the same age I was when I got away with a similar act and suffered silent guilt about it for many, many years. The store owners knew she was not a thief, and so did the police, but they wanted to scare the two girls. They wanted their moms and dads to be the bad guys doing the punishing. Now, I wanted to be seen in the world as a modern, understanding mother. I wanted the neighbors to be proud of the way I handled the situation. So I bit back my anger and disappointment. I chomped hard on the impulse to scream at her, "You know better than this," or "What will the neighbors think?" I was calm, and I asked her questions about her frame of mind, about her intentions. I wanted her to know she could talk to me, but she was sullen. I did not threaten her. I was determined to listen actively, reflecting back her excuses as if they had merit, and I assured her that I loved her. That was when she started crying. "If you really loved me," she sobbed, "you'd be mad at me." And she was right. She didn't need my understanding at that moment. She knew she had done wrong. She needed to know that my rules had validity and that I stood behind them. She was prepared to dislike me for defending my rules, but she was not prepared for me to ignore them or to let her off without a scolding. Story 2, still in my family. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, whom I have learned to be fond of over the years in spite of his opinions, is a member of a church that is very clear which neighbors count and what one must do to enlarge the neighborhood base of their particular world. It is his sacred obligation to convert me to his way of believing whenever we are together. He has told me as much in so many words. In our earlier relationship, I would listen to his opinions and say, "That's very interesting. I don't agree, but I can see where your values are." And he would ask me what I believed, not, you will note, what I thought. And then he would tell me where and how I was totally wrong. I was polite and I didn't try to change his mind. He was rude and thought my mind was depraved as my lifestyle. I worked outside the home, and he told me so whenever he could. I would walk away angry and confused. How could a nice person like me, who believes in his right to the freedom of religion, be so misunderstood and put down? What was the matter with my church that it didn't have a response for people like him? Well, as we grew to respect one another as individuals, we simply quit talking about religion. But we have not changed our basis of theological assumptions. He is still free to believe as he wishes, and I am still wrong. I care what he thinks, but he doesn't have that burden because I'm not thinking correctly. Our inability to discuss our most cherished values comes directly out of our individual interpretation of what will the neighbors think. So institutions are affected by WWTNT theology as well as people. I remember 2 Unitarian Universalist churches that were neighbors of a congregation I served, which both suffered from the liberal version of what will the neighbors think. The neighbors in these cases were members of the congregation themselves. In one church, there was a woman who had no problem disagreeing with anyone. In the middle of the minister's sermon, she would rise to her feet and contradict him. In the middle of a board meeting, she would suddenly appear to argue vehemently against something on the agenda or for something that had been failed to be put on the agenda. She would talk at coffee hour and berate others for their ideas. She would demand of any gathered group that they immediately stop what they were doing and follow her lead. She did not care what any of the neighbors thought. Her problems, I have to admit, were probably mental, but the leadership of the church, believing it is imperative of their Unitarian Universalist principles to offer everyone the freedom of word and deed, had a very difficult time knowing how to deal with her. What will the neighbors think if we don't allow her the freedoms we so loudly profess for all? What will the neighbors think if we throw one of our own out on the street? It required an outside facilitator to help them realize that they were allowing her to damage the church with their politeness and their WWTNT thinking, and that barring her from attendance was not so much abridging her freedoms as that was assuring their own. Very difficult decision. In the other church, a member had in the past loaned the congregation a large sum of money at low interest. They were repaying him with moderate sums so to have a balanced budget each year. They saw his generosity and kindness, but over the years, this man had held them ransom for his generous favor. He was president of the board beyond the number of terms their bylaws suggested. He chaired several key committees simultaneously. Like a good citizen, he always attended congregational meetings, and whenever anyone disagreed with him, he reminded them that the church would not be there if it hadn't been for him. He was not mentally disturbed. He was simply mean, tyrannical, and I'll say it now, he was evil. But Unitarian Universalists do not recognize evil as a theological concept. What would the neighbors think if we were to go against our own principles of allowing members to define their own theologies? And what would the neighbors think if we stood judgment upon him? Only after long consideration of these questions were they able to agree that for the sake of the neighborhood, excommunication is possible, even preferable at times, in a Unitarian Universalist church. The problem with having a theology of freedom of belief, of having a theology that refuses to define good and evil for all time, of having a theology that supports the individual first, without having a predefined way of behaving in all circumstances for all times, we tend to revert to the sacred theology of our youth. What will the neighbors think? We try harder to be polite, hoping to convert the problem or the evil to our own desperate examples of good and right behavior. We try harder to be understanding, to be generous and non-judgmental. By not having a definition of evil that covers every slightest anticipated infraction, we are able to go to battle against only the most outrageous injustices, only the most obvious to us abnormalities, only the most heinous corruptions. And even then, we are sometimes reluctant to go to battle under a communal banner. In almost every Unitarian Universalist church that I have served, individuals are encouraged to take up arms against injustice and intolerance, but not in the name of the church or fellowship, because there might be someone in the congregation who disagrees. The greatest strength of our theology, that we give affirmation to the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, is sometimes its greatest weakness. We assume that every individual is going to live up to his or her potential of worth and dignity, that he or she is going to make choices and take responsibility for them. And if we don't believe this, we at least hope reverently that this is true. We forget in trying to be good as we define it, in trying to be non-discriminatory and understanding, that we are also neighbors, and it is important what we think as well. We forget when we revert to the theology of what will the neighbors think, that that too is a passive and hereditary faith, that it doesn't always matter what the neighbors think, that it doesn't matter if the neighbors don't like us, if the neighbors are wrong in their thinking. When we hear the ample outpourings that appear on radio and television news about what some religious leaders consider the right and the only way to think and act about certain ideas or issues, our reactions often reflect our liberal religious stance. We are either embarrassed for their outrageous righteousness or angry at their trampling upon our freedom of thought and belief. We don't have a creed that tells us we must all believe alike. So we're upset when the all-knowing neighbors tell us how to believe or behave. We wouldn't do that to them, would we? I'll bet your minister doesn't scold you from the pulpit and tell you that you are sinful and weak. I don't when I preach, because I, like many of you, left the church that scolded me when I knew in my heart that I was right. And because you don't have that model from your minister, you probably tend not to scold anyone else personally either. Oh yeah, we talk about them behind their backs, but we don't scold them in public. We are nice in public. We are appreciated for our politeness and our thoughtfulness in gently presenting our point of view. But I think sometimes we miss opportunities for correcting the madnesses of the world. We miss opportunities for eliminating the small evils before they grow larger. We miss opportunities for telling people there is another way to think, opportunities for talking about our church and our beliefs and our principles. I come very close to scolding sometimes because this disturbs me and I don't know how to help us get over our theology of what will the neighbors think, without saying we should have articles of condemnation in the newspapers, that we should be spreading the good news of this church, that we should not let things we believe are wrong go on just because we want to be liberal and polite. I will withhold my scolding finger and ask only that you consider one question. What theology, what basic value, what authority supports you in your decision to either act or do nothing in the following situations or ones similar to them? You are at a party, and one person insists on telling ethnic jokes, or consistently uses words like nigger or kike. What do you say out loud in the name of your values? Or do you fear you might spoil the party? Or you're in the grocery store and you see a mother frustrated by the whining of a small child. Take that child and shake it roughly, or slap it to make it behave, or abuse it by calling it vile names. What do you do in the grocery store in the name of your ethics? You're at work and someone is holding forth on the only right way to be religious. And do you speak up in the name of the Unitarian Universalist faith? You're at coffee after the service and you hear someone berate another member for some action that is not, in his opinion, the Unitarian Universalist norm. Voting for the wrong political party, perhaps. Yes, we do have Republicans in our midst. Or listening to the wrong kind of music. Yes, some of us like country music. Or not supporting a social action task force decision. What do you do in the name of your congregation? Are you too polite to make a comment, take an action? Is the situation not abhorrent enough to run the risk of social embarrassment? I mean, what would the neighbors think about your foisting your opinions on someone's right to free speech if you spoke up at the party and said, I wish you wouldn't tell those stories or say those words because I find them belittling and offensive? I mean, what would the neighbors think about your interfering in other people's business if you diverted the mother from her abusive behavior by asking her to stop, or perhaps offered to help with the children while she shops? What would the neighbors think about your proselytizing your church, your religion, without being asked? What would the neighbors think about your rudeness in disagreeing with someone, applying that they were wrong? Who would like you if you did these terrible things? If I really loved you, I would tell you how angry I am when these offenses go unchallenged, except that I know how difficult such challenges are. So I will refrain from scolding if you will consider how universal the theology of what will the neighbors think really is. I will not should on you if you will consider an alternative theology as a way of acting out of your Unitarian Universalist faith and ethics in public. Be nobody's darling. Be an outcast, Walker said. What differences does it make what the neighbors think of you? The delicious irony of allowing yourself to be an outcast is that you meet so many interesting new neighbors. Take the contradictions of your life and wrap them around you like a shawl to parry stones and to keep you warm. There is no one writing in a book to decide whether you get into heaven or receive gifts. There's only one story about your life, and it is the story of how you wrap your contradictions about you. Ours is purposely a faith of ambiguity, of contradiction, of paradox. For ours is a faith of unlimited growth. Remember how as children you were always growing out of your clothes, how embarrassing it was to have cuffs above your wrist and hems above your knees? Well, as we grow in spirit and in faith, we outgrow the conventions of our childhood. The only thing that fits us, that really suits us, are the contradictions of our lives. Walker said, watch the people succumb to madness with ample cheer. Oh, there is a madness aplenty in the world, and even if it is the popular madness to be at the moment, we do not have to participate there. Let them look askance at you, and you askance reply. Be pleased to walk alone, uncool, or line the crowded riverbeds with other impetuous fools. Make a merry gathering on the bank. Whatever the choices you make, you will not be alone for long. Maybe in participating in a particular group, you will be uncool. The neighbors will be watching you, but there are other groups, other impetuous fools, making a merry gathering and waiting for you to take up the mantle of discerning neighborhood. I want to tell you a little story and something that I discovered once about how to handle people who want to draw you into argument or whose arguments embarrass you. And this is the secret of this. You don't have to wait until you get home to say, oh, I should have said this. I was once at an auto dealership getting my car, the oil changed or something, and it was a nice day and I had taken my knitting outside, which left me open for somebody coming to sit next to me. It was a young woman who was also getting her car serviced. She sat down next to me and we talked about knitting, and then we talked about our common cars, and we talked about the lovely weather, and then we ran out of things to tell each other because we didn't know each other. And I could see her mind working. What can I say? What can I say? And suddenly she came up with this. She said, you know what I read? I read somewhere that in 15 years, there will be more brown people in our country than there are white. And I thought, I don't want to have this discussion. And so I purposely misunderstood her, and I said in the same shocked voice she used, I know, and won't the children be beautiful? She suddenly had to go to the bathroom, and she never came back outside. But she knew my point of view. I call that mind free, which protects itself against the usurpations of society, and which does not cower to human opinion, which refuses to be the slave or tool of the many or of the few, and guards its empire over itself as nobler than the empire of the world. So said Channing. I, Annie Foerster, call that mind free, which is nobody's darling. If the neighbors complain about the noises you make, invite them to join your party. And what a grand party we might all have. Let us sing again together. Now, I had written down the wrong title to the hymn that was in the order of service. Do you have 146, Soon the Day Will Arrive? Good, let's stand and sing that one. We extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Hold on to what is good, even if it is just a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree which stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. And hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. So may it be in all our lives. Please join us for coffee and conversation after the pianist speaks.
And let me propose that instead of my planned postlude, let us have one final bit of congregational singing and sing happy birthday to Reverend Annie.
Thank you.